Hi. Welcome to another episode of Harmonic Leadership. I'm Lowell French, and I'm very happy to be back with you here again as we continue the topic of inclusive leadership, as it says in the subtitle of the book, Leading with Inclusive Mindful Caring. So the last couple of videos and this video talks in depth about that idea of inclusivity and making sure that there's nothing that's getting in the way of our being inclusive. And one of the biggest stumbling blocks, one of the biggest brick walls that can happen is bias. And we touched on it last episode. We're going to go in depth into bias in this episode. And as I shared in the last episode, what I often do when I'm teaching this content is ask people to raise your hand if you're human. Okay, and then I jokingly kind of look around the room or look on the screen if it's a webinar and say, okay, I see that we're all human. Okay, now raise your hand if you have bias. And I'm looking closely to see the reactions. Typically, people's eyes get big, and they oftentimes do this number. They're not sure if they should have their hand up or down. Do I have bias? I don't want to admit that I have bias because it's uncomfortable for us to consider if we have bias or not. Bias has become a dirty word, a bad word, a word of blame. And it's because bias does lead to negativity. Bias does cause a lot of the problems that we see in organizations and the broader world today. But as we talked about last time, bias by itself is not bad. It's the whole apples and oranges situation that I talked about last time. I love apples. I don't really like oranges as much. They give me an upset stomach. So part of my bias is keeping me from having an upset stomach. But it's when those biases get in the way of good leadership, when it touches people in a negative way, when these are inanimate objects. It doesn't matter. The apples and oranges don't have feelings. We don't think anyway. That's a deeper subject of another video. But when the beings that we are showing bias towards do have feelings, that's when it can cause issues. Let's say I'm a leader who likes orange shirts, and so I surround myself with people who also like orange shirts, and I'm not going to hire somebody who's not wearing an orange shirt when they come in for the interview. So I end up getting this team of mini-me's that all like orange shirts, and if somebody comes in with let's say a red shirt on, it's like, oh, I'm not going to listen to them because I have a bias for orange shirts and a bias against red shirts. So silly example, but you can take any element of diversity and substitute it, and the effect can happen. So, as it says here in the page 32, leadership biases, if you're human, you have biases, and those biases affect the decisions you make and the way that you lead others. It's a fact. And hopefully there's enough references to scientific research and psychological articles within this section or within the book and the appendix that you're going to fully recognize that, okay, it's a fact. We need to just accept that it's a fact, and then work to manage the biases that we have that are causing negativity. Because not all bias that we have will cause negativity for others, but we need to recognize when it does and mitigate it. So first of all, address it if it's already caused the damage, and then mitigate it from causing damage in the future. So because this is a very weighty topic, deep topic, and because it can be very emotional for people, I will do some reading of paragraphs so that I say things extremely carefully. And when I am extemporaneously talking about the content, I'll even stutter a little bit if I feel myself about to say something that is not the best phrasing. So I'll apologize up front if I seem a little stuttered through this particular video. But it's because I want to be extremely careful in what I end up saying on this topic. All right, so I'm going to read this first paragraph verbatim. Every person on earth has biases that affect how they view the world and the decisions they make. Bias is defined as a preference for or prejudice against someone or something that prevents impartiality. Leaders may be conscious of many of these biases and may even intentionally display them within their leadership to cause an effect. This would be an explicit bias. An example is when a leader with a bias towards action orientation shames an employee for taking too long to plan the tasks. It may feel to the leader that they are influencing the employee to become more action-oriented, but it may instead be causing the employee to feel ashamed for working within their natural working style. Leaders also have many unconscious biases that are displayed without full awareness. This is known as implicit bias. An example is when a leader gives the best assignments to the person who is most like them in terms of an element of diversity. This affinity bias for the employee causes a favoritism that may not be recognized by the leader, but will definitely be recognized by the other employees who are being biased against because they are not like the leader in that element of diversity. Okay, going back to the silly orange shirt example, an explicit bias is, hey, I'm only hiring people with orange shirts. I'm only promoting people into my leadership ranks who wear orange shirts on a regular basis. And I know I'm doing it, and I don't care. That's an explicit bias. An implicit bias would be that if that same leader who loved orange shirts, if suddenly they had somebody come into a meeting with a different color shirt on, and they don't know that they're doing it, but they're not giving them the time of day. They're not inviting them into the conversation. They're instead inviting only those who happen to be wearing orange shirts that day to speak. Here again, substitute orange shirt with any element of diversity. Could be racial, could be ethnic, could be background. It could be university affiliation. It could be many, many different things that are causing this bias to show up within this leader. So we have to do this with every act, every statement, and every decision made by a leader is influenced by bias. We have to recognize that. And we must then always ask, how is it affecting others? As mentioned earlier, this is uncomfortable. We don't want to admit that we have bias. We're kind of doing this number. Oh, I don't know. Do I have bias? Yeah, we do. We have to raise our hands strongly and admit it. And we must also ask with every act, every statement, how is it affecting others? Because it could be having a negative effect, and we may not know about it because it could be showing up through implicit means. And bias does lead to discrimination. Not all biases, but many biases do lead to discrimination. My apples and oranges bias, that's rarely going to cause a discrimination unless somebody is so strong in their feeling of loving oranges that they are turned off by me saying I don't like oranges. So there again, the strength of my language is important. If I say, I hate oranges, they're awful, nobody should be eating oranges, then yeah, that orange lover out there, they're going to be offended by it. But if I say, oranges, I don't really like them, they upset my stomach, something about the texture in my mouth I just don't really like, generally that person's not going to be offended by that. They're going to just view it as a difference. And as long as I'm respectful to them, they're respectful to me, it's not going to cause an issue in the relationship. But even something as small as apples and oranges preferences could, if I'm stating that belief too strongly. All right, so we need to just understand that any element of diversity is prone to causing pain upon those who are different. And as leaders, we need to instead use the elements of diversity as a path to creating acceptance, understanding, and peace. And here I'll go a little bit deep. When you examine the world and the history of the world and consider every element of war, of pain, of disagreement that has occurred throughout the history of humankind, you can trace it back to the source of bias. Pausing there to let that sink in. Think about those historical events of one nation conquering another nation, of one race of people going to war against another race of people, of religious differences causing war and such dissension. It comes down to bias. Bias of a prejudice for or prejudice against. We're supporting, we're fighting for those who we have a preference for. We're fighting against those who we have a prejudice against. So it shows up in big and small ways in every aspect of human existence. Now, in our leadership, there are many biases that get in the way through the clouding of judgment. And as it says here in the top paragraph on page 33, there's over 100 named cognitive biases that are you can pinpoint, you can magnify and tune into them. I've listed here the big ones that get in the way within an organizational setting, but I'll invite you to explore all of the ones that are not listed here as well. And this is a long list. I would love to go down them one by one and explore each of them, but we would be here for a very long time. And I try to keep these videos fairly short. So I'm just going to highlight a few. Now, a number of these are the ones that definitely are the main ones that cause issues in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you're probably going to recognize them, like the ageism, the racism is down here as well, racial bias. But there's many of them that are not as recognizable, but are kind of overriding issues within an organization that a lot of the other biases will fall within, will be influenced by. So I'm going to hit a couple of these that I've seen in my experience working with leaders throughout many different types of organizations and sizes of organizations that get in the way and are often implicit. People just don't recognize it. And the first one is confirmation bias, as we see here where I'm highlighting. Seeking only the information that confirms pre-existing opinions and beliefs and disregarding information that contradicts. This is a big one with many leaders because leaders tend to have strong opinions. They got to where they are by having strong opinions, voicing them, and those opinions being right enough that it caused good results within the organization. And leaders like their opinions. That tends to be another sign of a strong leader is, hey, I like my opinions. It goes into a term called the psychology of self, where we all kind of had this feeling of what I think is right, and I'm going to go with my gut. That's a psychology of self common phrase. Confirmation bias is when we have these strong opinions and we are only allowing the information in that confirms those thoughts, ideas, and opinions. And we're going to filter out any information that is attempting to contradict it. So we're only allowing ourselves to hear things that we want to hear. Another one that's often related to that is conformity bias, feeling a pressure to conform to a group and the group's thinking, often called groupthink, and displaying favoritism for those others who also conform and prejudice against those who don't. These are often related because what that leader will often do is by having that strong opinion and only allowing the information in to confirm that opinion, that leader will also be saying, okay, you better believe in this opinion too, or you're not going to be favored. You're going to be unfavored. I'm only going to allow those in my closest circle who conform to my thoughts, ideas, and opinions. And the people out there are feeling that conformity bias. Oh, I better say I like orange shirts, or I'm going to be out of a job, or I'm not going to get that promotion, or I'm not going to get that great assignment. It's going to go to somebody who says they like orange shirts. So they end up conforming to that leader's strong opinion. And then those who don't conform, who don't say, oh, I love orange shirts, then they could be have prejudice shown against them. So those two are biggies that show up and will affect so many of the other biases that you see on the page. A couple others that I'll highlight. Illusory superiority is a common one with leaders. As we grow, we tend to, in leadership and in role and within an organization, it's natural that we're going to get an ego. People tend to stroke your ego as you get better and better and grow in an organization, and a lot of people allow it to go to their heads. I giggle and I pause because you probably have all worked with or for people who are just full of themselves. They have this huge ego, and they think that they got there on just their own laurels and that they're better than everyone else. And that's what illusory superiority is. That egocentric feeling of superiority, thinking one is better than others, and better than others perceive you to be. And then a related bias is the Dunning-Kruger effect, where people overrate their own abilities and underrate other people's abilities. Oh, I got to this high position because I am so great, and you are not that great. That's why you didn't get to this high position. When actually that other person may be greater in terms of knowledge, skills, and abilities, but they didn't have some sort of inroad in order to get that higher position. Then the last one that I'll highlight here that's related as well is self-serving bias, and that's perceiving oneself as overly favorable and ascribing success to internal strengths, but blaming failures solely on external factors. This is also known as the actor-observer bias. So this is an example of, let's say that I made this decision that ended up being a good decision for the organization. And if I'm falling into some of those other traps like the illusory superiority, I'm going to be prone to say, oh, I made this decision because I'm great. And this decision was proved to be fruitful for the organization because I made it. But if that decision led to failure, instead of owning up to it to say, oh, my bad, my decision, my bad, I instead look for some external factor to blame. Oh, no, my decision was right. It was the external factor that caused this to fail. So that is the self-serving bias. So again, many of these are ones that show up daily in leadership. And if we examine each of them closely, and I raise my hand to this too, I've been teaching this for a long time, and I still, if I examine my decisions, my actions, my statements closely, I can still recognize many of these. And it irks me because I should know. But we get wrapped up in our busy days, especially if stress is involved. Generally, these come out during times of stress. So I have to catch myself. I have to, analyze at the end of the day to say, okay, what did I do or say today that could have shown a bias? And what do I need to do to correct it? Which will lead to our next page, the 3 A's of mitigating bias. And I've been talking for quite a while, so I'm going to pause and take a little drink of water. So when we do display bias, we must immediately address it. Because what happens if we don't address it immediately? It festers, it grows, and it's like a virus that spreads. But too often we don't address it immediately, or too often we fall into this trap called escalation of commitment, where instead of being aware and acknowledging the mistake, we double down, stating nothing's wrong. So going back to that self-serving bias we just talked about, that example of a leader saying that this thing failed because this external factor caused it to fail. It wasn't me. An example of escalation of commitment would be, let's say that somebody shows a fact that says, no, this external factor was not the cause of that failure. Someone who's falling into the trap of escalation of commitment would say, yes, it was. It definitely was. And this is why it was. And they won't accept the truth of the situation. And we see this all the time in the world. We see it all the time in organizations and on the world stage as well, where people are just escalating their commitment, even in the face of facts that are saying, nope. So that leads us to the 3 A's of mitigating bias: acknowledging, assessing, and addressing. Tried to create this frame that was easy to remember and easy to take the steps. So acknowledging is acknowledging the biases to build an awareness of instances when they occur. As said many times, we all have bias. No one's perfect. We're going to show it. It's going to happen. And the more that we can become aware, the better. And then not just being aware, but acknowledging that we have bias. It's uncomfortable, especially at the beginning. The more that you talk about it, the more that you open up about it, it does get to the point where I won't say it's fully comfortable, but you can become proficient at acknowledging the biases. And once you see that acknowledgement will have benefits, it will take down some of those walls that have been created, then it becomes even easier to take those steps. Next is to assess, and that's assessing the bias to analyze the various impacts on all of the people being affected. All of the people, not just some of the people. All of the people that are being affected. And that's just taking careful consideration to say, okay, this bias was shown, who was affected, and how. And creating a list. And by doing that analysis, it will increase our awareness next time to help us from falling down that same trap again. And then addressing bias by correcting instances of unfairness and mitigating further occurrences. Okay, this is obviously the biggest and hardest step. We can acknowledge it in our own mind, we can assess it in our own mind, but we have to address it, because if we don't, that's when it festers. That's when it turns into a virus and the negativity spreads. So I've created a list here of some things that you can do that are steps to take in addressing the bias. First is to intend to address the situation with all those affected. We have to have the intention. Without intention, we will not act to address the bias. And then develop the message that will be provided as an apology. Most biases that led to negativity require an apology. I probably could say all instead of most. All biases that occur that led to negativity require an apology to those affected. And then create an action plan to mitigate future incidences from occurring. So think about what led up to it. Think about where you could have recognized and stopped and changed direction, and create a plan for doing that the next time. And next is to review with people from the affected group to gauge appropriateness. So find the trusted advisor from the group, the population that was negatively impacted by the bias that you showed, and say, look, this is what I'm planning on saying in terms of, or writing in a message in terms of an apology. And this is my action plan for how I can keep this from happening again. What do you think? How will it play with this audience that you're a part of? How will it be received? What will the impact be? Hopefully it'll be positive impact, moving forward impact, and not negative or causing a further trip down the wrong path. So once you've gone through that review, revised as needed, then communicate the apology and action plan throughout the organization. So if the scope of that is based on the impact of the negative impact from the bias. So if it was just within the team, communicate it to the team. If it's with other teams, communicate it to those other teams as well. If you're a higher level leader and the impact was across a broader organization, communicate it to that broader organization. If others were affected, customers, clients, external folks, communicate it there as well. Maybe changing the message slightly to make it more appropriate, but you need to communicate it to all who were affected. And then dedicate the necessary time and resources to ensure the actions are followed. Find an accountability partner. You can use the same trusted advisor who you use to review your message and your action plan to say, please make sure that I stick with this. Please make sure that I follow the steps that I outlined to mitigate this in the future. And please help me to learn from this. Okay. As I said, this is heavy stuff. So hopefully you're hanging in there on this one. All right. The next part of this content just talks about where our biases come from. Biases are based on beliefs. Most biases are based on a person's core belief structure that create feelings of right or wrong, safe or unsafe, and valued or unvalued. And here again, I'm going to just read this paragraph verbatim because it's carefully phrased in the book. Beliefs are formed at an early age through familial and cultural influences, and they are strengthened throughout the formative years to the point of being emboldened in adulthood. These core beliefs are the primary cause of the biases that one holds. The people who taught you right from wrong, safe from unsafe, and valued from unvalued had the intent of keeping you safe and protected, but unfortunately also embedded biases against those who were somehow counter to the beliefs that were instilled. Once a belief is embedded in one's mind, it is extremely difficult to examine it objectively, and even harder to revise the belief to be more inclusive of others. But it is possible. Okay. So here again, using my silly example of the orange shirt, if I was raised to believe by my parents, by my culture, by all the subcultures that affected me, by, let's say, my religious upbringing, if I was led to believe by all those influences that orange shirt people are great and other shirted people are not great, then that's going to be embedded and emboldened throughout my adulthood. And it's going to be hard to get over, but it is possible. It would lead to those feelings of I see that orange shirted person. I'm going to invite them in to my inner circle. That other person's not wearing an orange shirt. I'm going to keep them out of my inner circle. It will help us to recognize that, that is a core belief of mine that I need to be able to overcome. And just having that recognition can help us next time to see that person of the other colored shirt and say, oh, you know what? I know I have a bias towards orange shirt people. I'm going to force myself to overlook that. So, but we must understand that situation of having that core belief can lead to something very negative, and it's highlighted here. If a person feels that their beliefs are wholly and fully right, they are also implying that those with differing beliefs are fully wrong. And let that sit and sink in for just a bit. If I, as a leader, in my leadership messaging, am saying, only people of orange shirts are good people, only people with orange shirts will be promoted within the organization, then what I'm saying is, if you don't believe that people with orange shirts are the best, then you're fully wrong. If you believe anything differently than what I believe. And I'm still using this silly example, but I'm sure you can extrapolate it and place another form of diversity element in there. When I as a leader speak strong opinions, not just thoughts and ideas, but strong opinions that are based on a belief system, I could be building that wall between myself and the people who are listening to that leadership message. Now, those who also believe that same thing, who believe that orange shirts are the best, then I'll be actually creating a stronger bond with them. But it will be causing damage to every other relationship out there. This happens in organizations all the time. Now, people do want their leaders to be passionate about the organization, to be passionate about the work that's being done. But there's a line there. You can be passionate about the work, but when you start getting into personal beliefs, to personal opinions, and voicing those strongly, that's when that line is crossed, and you're actually building a wall between you and the people who you were trying to inspire, the people who you were trying to lead. And the tricky part is that wall is going to be different for the different people out there based on their unique background, their unique elements of diversity that have led to their belief system. So what can we do? Hopefully this last little paragraph here and what you'll find on the next page will help. So I'm going to read the first part of this paragraph here again to phrase things very carefully. Imagine your beliefs to be like a pair of glasses that create your view of the world. When you look through the glasses at others, the view is filtered through the beliefs that have been prescribed to you. As you treat another person in a certain way, it's because of the view that you have of them as being right or wrong, safe or unsafe, or valued or unvalued. Now, imagine taking off the glasses and seeing the person fully and whole, without the filtering that the prescribed view has imposed. Endeavor to appreciate the wonderful uniqueness of the person and how their differences are of value. Over time, this technique can help to broaden your perspective and see all others as being right, safe, and valued. So, having this picture of glasses can help to overcome this situation. When you're speaking to that group and you feel yourself going down that path of personal opinion, based on core belief system, think, okay, I'm going to take these glasses off and see people's reaction to what I'm saying. It's like, oh, okay. Only people who share that same prescription of glasses will be seeing this situation in the way that I am. So hopefully that will help in creating that alternate view. And the rest of the paragraph here leads into the last activity that I'll invite you to do after you stop the video, and that is creating a view of your beliefs t-shirt. This is inviting you to consider that all of your core beliefs that you hold strong and dear, let's say that they were on full display for everyone else to see. So every action that you had throughout the day, you would walk up to the person, you'd get on camera with a video call, and they would see on your shirt all of your core beliefs. How comfortable would that make you feel? So on this little activity on page 35, you're invited to explore that by creating the shape of a t-shirt and on there writing words. If you have the book, you can do it within the book, obviously. If not, just get a spare sheet of paper or do it in an app of some sort on a device to create this view. And I'll invite you to consider those deep core beliefs and write them bigger to create a bit of a word cloud effect. And those smaller, less strong beliefs to write them in smaller print. And that can help you to visualize walking up to somebody and they see those very strong core beliefs that you feel deeply about in big, bold print. And then as you're doing that exercise, and after you finish your illustration, sorry, I've been talking a long time today. And after you complete your illustration, I invite you to consider the questions that you see at the bottom of the page. First question, would I feel comfortable with everyone seeing my beliefs fully displayed on the shirt? Next question, what beliefs would be viewed as positive and foster diverse relationships? Next, what beliefs could be viewed as negative and cause offense to others? And lastly, what beliefs are missing that could help in mitigating my biases? So these are deep, weighty questions. And as mentioned a couple of times, it's important for us to feel the weight of this information because our words, our actions as a leader are causing impact. And we want that impact to be positive. And we want to mitigate any words, actions, behaviors that could lead to negativity. And by recognizing that those are often caused by biases that we hold and are showing either explicitly or more likely implicitly, by recognizing that, by being able to become aware of it and then mitigating those, it can help us to create positivity and not cause negativity. So I hope that this information has been impactful for you. I hope that it will help you in your leadership. Be well.